Hi, this is Rachel Nolan, and this is my case study, Teacher Reacts Negatively to Personnel Evaluation. So, a summary of the case. Mrs. Stevens is a teacher who apparently is new to the school. She's having problems with her class, getting them motivated and engaged. The principal has been through her class multiple times, and every time the students appear disengaged, they don't respect Mrs. Stevens. When the principal walks by, they think the class is loud, and then when the principal comes in, they quiet down, but they're still not behaving very well. Even with the principal inside the classroom, they're distracted and they don't seem to respect their teacher. So the principal sits down with Mrs. Stevens and shares their findings, and Mrs. Stevens reacts very negatively to that. She is rude, she's defiant, she says that none of it's her fault, that the kids act differently when the principal's in the room, and that her kids are still learning even though they might not be engaged 100% of the time. So the principal recommends non-renewal of her contract because she's not tenured. She would be tenured the following year had her contract been renewed. When the principal shares that with Mrs. Stevens, she blames the principal for an unfair evaluation process, says that her evaluations have not been helpful, she hasn't been given any advice on how to improve, and then she walks out of the room threatening to sue. So some legal and ethical issues. There's a couple people being harmed in this case, one being Mrs. Stevens herself. Because if her contract isn't renewed, she's out a job next year. Her students are also being harmed because they're clearly not engaged in class. We're not sure what their assessment data looks like, but it's clear that they're not learning at the best of their abilities because they don't have a very effective teacher. Mrs. Stevens most likely has the right to an appeal at the district level. In my district, if a teacher receives an evaluation that they think is inaccurate or unfair, they can appeal to the district, and then their case is judged by a panel of a few teachers and the superintendent and director of HR. So that might be an option in her district. Because she's not tenured, her contract is not guaranteed, so she doesn't really have a legal leg to stand on if her contract isn't renewed. Before you're tenured, you can be let go for most reasons. And the principal's actions don't appear to be discriminatory or harassment. The principal did try to meet with her to explain the situation before recommending the non-renewal. And so it shows that the principal was trying before it got to this. So the problem essentially is that an ineffective teacher feels her evaluations have been unhelpful or inaccurate, but the principal has chosen to not renew her contract. So some relevant facts. Mrs. Stevens' class is mostly teacher-directed, and students are unengaged or off task most of the time. In conferences, she is very irritable, hostile, defensive, rude, and not very professional from the sounds of it. Mrs. Stevens doesn't think that her students' behavior is her fault, and she says that she hasn't gotten good advice from her observations. It appears in the story that she has another observer, maybe a supervisor, that has not given her anything useful out of her evaluations. And any details about the school or the age of the students or demographics or anything else is not apparent. So I was reading this thinking high school, but an elementary school teacher might be reading it thinking elementary. We really don't know, and the age of the students might have been good to know, definitely. So some priority information. If they keep Mrs. Stevens at the school, that could be damaging because she would be tenured. It could be damaging not only to the students but other teachers. I know as a teacher, if I worked with someone who was so aggressive and hostile and unwilling to change, that would negatively affect my mood for sure, especially if I had to work closely with them if I taught the same subject. Mrs. Stevens has obviously an important stake in this outcome because it's her job. It says that she is very knowledgeable in her subject area, so it's very possible that she could improve her teaching practice over time and become an effective teacher. I would want to know who her supervisor is, what they have observed over time, and what feedback they've given her. I also want to know what advice has been given to her. Have any teachers been trying to help her? Has she reached out for help? Has she done any professional development up until now? I also want to know if she's brand new to the school, because it seems like from the story that she is new to the school this year, but it would be strange if she was getting tenure after 1 year. I haven't heard of that before. I guess it's possible in other states, but definitely I have never worked in a district that gave tenure after 1 year. So that would be something I'd want to know. If she had been there for a year before this, what happened that year. And then, has anyone looked at assessment data? So maybe her students are performing well on assessments, like she claims, or maybe they're not. And so we really might benefit from looking at that and comparing it to other teachers that teach the same content as her. So the way I see it, there are three options. One of them is to change course and recommend her contract be renewed. Another is to recommend her contract be renewed but provide her targeted supports. And then the third would be to stay the course and not renew her contract. If her contract is renewed just plain, the school is definitely avoiding conflict, but she might not ever improve, and now she's tenured and much harder to remove. If she's renewed with targeted supports, again, that's avoiding conflict, but it's giving her more options to improve, but she still might not, and she would still be tenured. And then the third option of letting her go, she might be able to appeal through the district depending on what the district is like, but the school then does not retain an ineffective teacher. So pros and cons of option one, just plain renewing her contract. You're avoiding appeals process, you're avoiding conflict, and possibly keeping teacher morale up. I think without knowing how the other teachers feel about Mrs. Stevens, it's really hard to say how this is going to affect the staff. I think either decision is going to affect the staff. Cons, student learning might suffer keeping that teacher in there, and then a teacher with bad attitude could affect staff morale as well, really depending on how they feel about her. Option two, pros would be, again, avoiding conflict, but also helping a struggling teacher improve, giving her professional development, avoid having to go through a hiring process, but again, a con might be that she doesn't improve. Finally, the pros of removing her, we can try to replace her with someone better, a better fit for the staff, more professional, who's willing to take direction. Student learning is not going to suffer in this case. And then cons, she might attempt legal action. I'm not sure if she has any grounds for that, but she threatened it. Staff morale might take a hit, again, if they think that teachers are just being let go with no reason, and we'd have to find a new teacher to hire. But what I decided was the best option was to not renew her contract. I think she could seek an appeal if she really thinks her evaluation was unfair, and then we can go through that process. But student learning is my most important goal. Students are clearly not learning to the best of their ability in her classroom, and she's not willing to improve. When I'm a principal, I am going to focus on curating a staff of professionals that are seeking to learn, and clearly she is not seeking to learn. She's argumentative. She is being rude towards the principal, and that is not an employee that I would want to deal with. And then finally, if I do renew her contract, what is the line? I see this clearly as bad teaching, and if she had taken the steps to ask for help or ask for professional development or admit her wrongdoings and seek improvement, then that would be a whole different story. But just admitting that she is not or saying that she's not at fault, in my mind, is not okay. So to implement this, I would submit my evaluation and recommendation to the district. I would consult with the superintendent and director of HR to let them know what is going on and her feelings about it. If the district does have an appeals process, she could go down that road. If they find that she is right, that her evaluation was inaccurate, then of course I would have to renew her contract. If they find that she is not right and the evaluation was fine, then she is not being renewed. And then finally, I would probably want to sit down with all those supervisors, people who conduct evaluations, talk it over and say, what are we doing? How can we improve? And how are teachers benefiting from this evaluation process? Okay, and that is what I would do in this case of the teacher that does not agree with her evaluation. Thanks.